Hi, and welcome to Open, the show that opens the Bronx and the rest of the world to you. I'm Kevin Aline, and today we'll update you on what's happening in and around our borough. As we approach the year 2023, we'll take a look back at some of the most pressing and important issues our country, city, and borough faced in 2022. So please stick around. The best of Open BxRx Tuesday starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Aline, and today is Tuesday, December 27th, and you are now watching Open, a live program bringing the Bronx and New York City straight to you. Don't forget to stay connected with us via social media at BronxNet TV. Student loan debt remains one of the most pressing issues facing several Americans throughout the country. During the past year, we saw major changes in regard to how the government approached the issue of student debt. However, a study from the Center for Microeconomic Data found the 2020 pandemic-related pause on student loan payments actually improved the credit score of many struggling graduates. As more Americans make an effort to strengthen their financial literacy, having a senior tax partner take the time to explain what this meant for many Americans was appreciated. So please stay tuned for this segment with senior tax partner for Commission ENT, Jeffrey Almanzar. Now, I want to jump right into it and talk about credit scores. Now, I know a lot of people know that we have them, but they probably don't know what it's for or what it actually means. So, can you explain, what is a credit score and how do you actually build upon this or make sure that it's in the right position?
Right. So, your credit score is it comes together from three different bureaus, right? So you have Equifax, you have Experian, you have TransUnion, and each one of these three companies they have their own credit score for you. When you combine all three of those credit scores, then you get what is called a FICO score. So your credit score can help you in numerous amount of things, from getting a job, from getting a better interest rate, whether you're going to buy a home or get a car, or even when you go and try to apply for a business loan for your business. So your credit is definitely something that you want to maintain in good standing. I would definitely recommend to have it above 700, 720. So you can really take advantage of good interest rates and not miss out on opportunities because of your credit.
And how do you actually build upon this? Because I think that if you're not really looking to, maybe buy a house, a lot of young adults run into this problem. You could kind of mess up your credit score. So how do you build upon this and make sure that it's in the right place?
So definitely you want to know exactly where you stand, right? So if you're young and you're just coming out of college, it all depends on maybe what actions you took prior to going to college, maybe at a point where you're already over 18. Some parents have already added their children to their credit cards at some capacity so they can start building a history of credit. So that's another, great idea for parents that they want to do for their kids. And then you want to go into one of these websites where you can grab one of your annual credit reports and you want to know where you stand. It's like when you go to the doctor for a physical, you want to know exactly what's wrong in order for you to know how to build it. And then, starting small, starting a credit card here and there and building your credit score, and building that relationship with these different companies.
Now, for many college graduates around the country, as I mentioned, they saw positive changes to their credit score in regards to the student loan payment freeze. Can you actually explain why they may have actually seen that change?
It could be a numerous of things. One would be the fact that some of these kids lost track of when their student loans were due, and if they miss one payment, automatically their credit score starts to decline. So now that they didn't have that responsibility, so they're able to build a strong credit history over time. So the fact that they didn't have any late payments can also add to the credit score. Um, I highly doubt that the debt was not on their credit score anymore. So it should still be there. And so just the fact that over time, the credit history has been able to sustain itself at a positive, that would make the credit score go up as well.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about student loans and debt because it's a huge issue affecting so many people in our country. Can you just explain, how this affects young people specifically, who are probably just starting to get, their own money, or maybe this is like their first job? How are student loans affecting them financially?
It's definitely a problem. So there's just a few things that I've noticed in this scenario when it comes to kids in college and student loans. And is one is what college are they going to, right? Two, what curriculum or major are they trying to pursue? And then three is the cost of these tuitions. So there's a lot of kids that go to school and they study and get these degrees and then end up doing something else than what they actually went to school for, or the pay is not enough for them to sustain themselves, to move, to buy a home, and to also pay off these student loans. So that's also something to consider, is what is it that you're actually investing in yourself for, right? For the future, and making sure that you know what the repercussions are of having this debt. So having this type of help or credit or forbearance or this $10,000 forgiveness is definitely a weight off their shoulders that they can advance a lot quicker towards their goals in adulthood.
Now, is a $10,000 loan forgiveness, do you think that's actually enough to kind of change a lot of people's financial situations? Because I know that a lot of people have been saying that President Biden has been promising that. But is that enough? I hear that some of the student loans could be like 70,000, these really high numbers. Is 10,000 enough to change your financial situation for a lot of these people dealing with student debt?
Well, I mean, any type of help is good, you know. So I'm not gonna downplay $10,000, because you could give 100 people $10,000 and you're gonna get 100 different outcomes, you know. But definitely, there's a lot more student loan debt. There's a lot more work to do, but I would definitely take advantage of that, and but also look for other programs. There's other grants. There's other student loan help. There's a bunch of different programs and scholarships that they can look into to help as well. I definitely I don't want to be the advocate to always have the government help us as much as they can. Obviously, there's always more to be done, but at the same time, there's other avenues that we can always look into to help ourselves as well. So a combination of both would definitely help the population, and so we can build our future. So definitely, there's definitely a lot more work to do. So I would leave it at that with that.
Now, I really want to know, for student loan payments, how can that actually affect your credit score? Because when I hear credit score, I'm usually thinking of, credit card bills and stuff like that. How can student loan payments affect your credit score?
Right. So it's a debt just like any other debt. It goes on your credit, and if you have any late payments, it would show up on your credit as a negative month that you didn't pay your bill on time. Um, so, I honestly don't think it's fair, being that these kids are in school and they're studying, and now they have to have this extra stress of making sure that they're paying these student loan debts every single month. And then if they don't, they get a credit score decline. Um, so, you have to find a way to pay on time, find whatever the bare minimum is if you're not working, to be able to stay on time, or maybe have it like some type of automatic system that would just take the money out of your account on the day when it's supposed to be paid, so you won't get any negative declines on your credit score.
Now, what is a good range that most people should aim to be in when it comes to having their credit scores, and what can they do now to boost their credit scores?
So definitely above 700, with all this inflation and all these interest rates that are coming up, you definitely want to have it, yeah, between the 700, and obviously 850 is the highest that you can go. So, I would look at this as a challenge, or as a type of board game, that you're constantly monitoring your credit. You could download apps like Credit Karma. You can get Experian to have their own app, TransUnion, Equifax. You can also go to any banks or credit unions and open up a secure credit card with a small balance and just use it. Try to pay it off at the end of the month, and have a reoccurring charge on it, and buy something small and just build your credit history. And over time you be able to see your credit score improve.
Now, we also saw in that picture, like you said, the lowest is 300, which is in the red. I'm curious to know, what can somebody who's in that area do to fix their credit score? Because it's really low, and I feel like that could be very challenging. What can they do to kind of get a little bit higher towards a 7 or 800?
So in that case, you want to look at your credit report. You want to see what's on there. You want to see what's causing your credit score to be so low. And there's a lot of strategies. Every 7 years, there's negative items on your credit score that automatically fall off your credit report. There's balances that you might have that are too high that you can start paying down. You can dispute any errors or any items that actually don't even belong to you. There's a lot of identity theft and fraud that can also affect your credit report. And you can call these companies and try to negotiate deals with them and tell them that you're going to get on a payment plan and pay a certain amount, or you can pay a certain amount of a percentage of what you owed. And in time, 6 months, 8 months, to a year, you should be able to get from that 300 to at least 600, and then keep going north from there.
Now, how can people stay up to date with you?
As always, my company, Commission Tax, you should be able to find me in all social medias, and on Facebook and Instagram. And now here on your channel, you'll be able to see these videos and share it with all your friends. So thank you. And it's always a pleasure being here. And I hope this information helps a lot of people.
We'd like to thank Jeff Almanzar for always taking the time to join us here on Open. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more Open right after this.
Every day, thousands of kids start vaping. And I can't let this happen to my kid. Of course, it's awkward to talk to your kids about the dangers of vaping. Hey, bestie, how's sketches, vaping? It's hard to get their attention. Ready? Go. Yes, look at that. You didn't turn yours over. So if you want to talk to your kids about the dangers of vaping, you have to get it trending. Right, Backpack Kid?
Let's do it.
First, invite your kid to do the vape talk. Let's try this. All right.
Why is he here?
Yeah, I gotta get it trending, honey.
Come on.
To the left. To the right. Let's go.
Oh, honey, can we talk?
Yeah, what's up?
I see a lot of your friends vaping.
Visit talkaboutVaping.org for tips on when and how to have the vape talk.
Kids!
I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to talk about it.
Families don't have to talk about everything, but they should talk about how to plan for an emergency.
Kids, you all right?
This family's prepared. Get tips and resources to make your family's emergency plan. Go to nyc.gov/readyny or call 311 for more information.
You can talk to me if you're feeling sad.
Thanks for hearing me out, bro.
Whenever you need to talk, I'm here, okay?
You can now watch MNN, Brick TV, QPTV, and SIC TV on BronxNet. Tune in to BX Omni, Channel 67 Optimum, 2133 Fios during most Sunday evenings. We'll show you some amazing content from our friends at Manhattan Neighborhood Network, Brick TV in Brooklyn, Queens Public Television, and Staten Island Community Television. Every borough represented in the Boogie Down. Epic partnerships for the ages. And catch our new Next channel, produced in partnership with MNN, 24/7 on BronxNet Channel 952 Optimum and 2138 Fios.
Welcome back. Our next segment takes a look at the issue of climate change. What was once considered an issue for the future has quickly become a current concern as many local and elected leaders join the fight to save our planet. The Inflation Reduction Act is one of many efforts used to address the effects of climate change. The act will focus on environmental justice, green jobs, and more, so please stay tuned for a segment on the Inflation Reduction Act with the CEO of the Urban Green Council, John Mandyke. Now, can you tell me a little bit more about the Inflation Reduction Act?
The Inflation Reduction Act is huge, Kibben. It represents the single largest investment in energy efficiency in the history of our country. And the broad goal here is to reduce our climate emissions 40% by 2030. This is exactly the type of action we need to combat the climate crisis that we see each and every day here in New York City and across the world.
Now, I know there are so many ways the act will combat issues of climate change, but can you just highlight a few that kind of stood out to you?
Well, for me, what stands out is a $9 billion investment in energy efficiency. This is for appliances, for systems within a building, a home, an office, to encourage people to use less energy. When we use less energy, we burn less fossil fuels at power plants. And when we burn less fossil fuels at power plants, we reduce carbon emissions and climate change overall. So this investment in energy efficiency is really, really important, and one that will move the needle significantly in our work to stem the worst effects of climate change.
Okay, so just to clarify, you may have touched on it, but I know the act will support the transition to clean energy, lowering energy costs for people across the country. Is that kind of like what you're talking about right now?
Well, there's those two separate things going on there. The first is the act will move our sources for electricity to renewable sources that don't burn carbon. That's important. But that's going to take time. Those are big infrastructure projects that we need. In the interim, we have to reduce the amount of energy that we use for the existing fossil fuel electrical plants. And that's what the energy efficiency piece is about. So there's two really important components going on here. First is how do we move to cleaner energy overall? And then in the process of doing that, how do we use less energy as a society?
Now, I'm curious to know, do you think this will encourage more Americans to reduce their carbon footprint?
Absolutely. In a number of ways. Let's just keep on the discussion we've been talking about. When Americans invest in energy efficient appliances, heating systems, cooling systems, hot water systems in their home, they're going to be reducing their carbon footprint. That's important for places like New York City. 70% of our carbon emissions come from buildings. And so when we reduce the amount of energy we're using in those buildings, we make a huge difference when it comes to climate change.
Now, I'm curious to know, do those appliances tend to be a little bit more expensive, or is that just a misconception?
Well, there's an acquisition cost, right? And so what we have to do in New York is we have to replace steam-based radiator systems with electrical heat pumps. Today, those radiator systems are burning fuel, oil or natural gas in the basement of the building, creating carbon emissions right there on the site. And by the way, creating health pollutants by burning those fuels. When we plug those systems into the electrical grid that becomes green over time, we reduce that carbon footprint. So there is an acquisition cost to buying those new heating and cooling systems. And the Inflation Reduction Act provides big incentives to do that, up to $4,000, for example, to install an energy efficient heat pump into those homes and apartments to replace the steam or fossil fuel based systems that are there today.
That kind of leads to my next point. Like, I know the bill is expected to assist Americans economically as well, with the creation of new jobs and funding for lower income communities. Can you explain why this was important to add?
Well, sure. I mean, we need to transition our economy to green jobs, and this law will do that. It will create significant demand for building retrofits for these appliances that we've been talking about, and somebody has to do all that good work. And so it's going to create jobs, great jobs, green jobs in the installation of heat pumps and retrofitting buildings and making buildings more energy efficient. On top of that, it directs resources where they're needed to low to moderate income communities and environmental justice communities. I mean, just alone, the EPA will provide $4.5 billion in block grants for environmental justice projects in environmental justice communities. And so those are things that we have to encourage with electrification, with ways that we can promote health while reducing climate impacts at the same time.
So we talked a little bit about the buildings, and I just got this idea. I know that a lot of the buildings in New York City are very, very old. I think some are like even from like maybe the 80s or even earlier. Can you explain how challenging will that be to kind of update it and make it more green?
Sure. 90% of the buildings we'll have in New York City are the buildings we have. I'm sorry, let me start over. 90% of the buildings we'll have in 2050 in New York City are the buildings we have today. So if we want to reduce our carbon footprint for the long term in New York City, we have to look at our existing buildings. And some of them are 100 years old, 200 years old. So it's a challenge for sure, but it's not impossible. And laws like the IRA provide the tools necessary and, frankly, the funding necessary to help us to tackle those big challenges.
Now, environmental justice leaders like Congressman Richie Torres cites pollution and similar environmental issues as one of the many causes of poor health in communities like the Bronx. How does the act address the issue of environmental racism and the disproportionate health effects it has on low-income communities?
Yeah, I'm really excited that the act is starting to address this issue, which is long overdue. Three quick examples. I'd mentioned this before, but there's $4.5 billion for electrification in low to moderate income communities. That's to help people do exactly what we're talking about, move from fossil fuel-based heating systems to electrical heating systems. There's $3 billion in block grants from the EPA to do projects in environmental justice communities that can address health along with climate. And there's another $1 billion from HUD to improve the sustainability and affordable housing. And those are just a few categories. So the act is really significant from that standpoint.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about fossil fuels because I know when we have these conversations, that comes up a lot. And it tends to be one of New York City's biggest challenges in the fight against climate change. What are some ways New York City contributes to the creation of fossil fuels?
Sure. Well, our biggest issue in New York are buildings. So if you think of all of the climate emissions in New York City, 70% come from buildings. And then 20% more or a little bit more comes from transportation, and then some from waste. So when you talk about reducing the effects of climate change in New York, you have to talk about reducing the use of fossil fuels used by buildings. And buildings use fossil fuels in two ways. They use it for lights and power. So when you turn on a switch that for electricity, that powers a power plant that could be 100 miles away that's producing the electricity. That power plant is burning natural gas that's creating the climate emission. That's a fossil fuel. The second way that buildings contribute to this is what we've been talking about is for heating and hot water. So in the basements of our buildings, particularly our residential buildings, we're burning oil or natural gas, which are fossil fuels, to create heat and hot water. Actually, that application right there is our single largest source of carbon emissions in New York City. It's from furnaces, boilers, and hot water heaters that are providing the heat and hot water for the city.
Now, I know your organization actually contributed to some of the changes that we are hopefully going to see. Can you explain when New Yorkers can expect to see these changes?
Sure. I mean, the changes have already started. And we have two big laws that are guiding us from a buildings perspective. So we have Local Law 97, which is a world-leading law that places carbon caps on large buildings in New York City to reduce those climate emissions. Those caps start in 2024, so that's not that far away. And then we have Local Law 154, which phases out fossil fuels in new construction. And that's coming on board too. And so we have these two big laws that'll impact the buildings community that are right on our doorstep.
And I understand that this is not going to include places like restaurants or hospitals. Can you quickly explain why?
Sure. Well, I think you're referring to Local Law 154, which is the phase out of fossil fuels in new construction. There are a couple categories where alternatives aren't available yet, or you need that assured backup power. So in a hospital, you want backup power for resiliency, and that backup power might come from a fossil fuel. And so that's the reasoning behind hospitals, is for resiliency and also some specialty labs. When it comes to restaurants, in some cases, we don't have electrical alternatives across the board yet for all commercial restaurant cooking equipment. And so it's a matter of time for technology to catch up.
Now, I think this is a really great start. Can you just let everybody know what they can do to stay in touch with your organization and probably learn some tips on what they can do in their personal lives to be a little bit more environmentally friendly?
Sure. Well, visit our website, urbangreencouncil.org. We spend a lot of time on our website making sure that we're providing the right data at the right place at the right time to help people understand the role we can take with the buildings community to reduce carbon emissions overall.
We'd like to thank John Mandyke for joining us on the show and further explaining the Inflation Reduction Act to our viewers. Please stick around. We'll be right back after this.
How do you know when you've made the right decision? It's the feeling you get in your gut. The one that tells you what's right or wrong. It's the one that says, sure, I can have a drink. Or the feeling that says, okay, I've been drinking. Now what? It's the voice inside you that says, I'm buzzed. Better leave the car when it's time to go. Plan ahead. Catch a sober ride. Buzz driving is drunk driving.
Man, it's lonely. Like, going through life lonely.
There is the therapeutic aspect of music, just expressing how you feel. I'm going to talk to Howie about his feelings, making it into a song.
Dear moms and dads, what you have achieved here today is going to help us and our futures. It is why we are coming up on stage to collect your diplomas.
You know it's true.
Mom, love you always.
Everything I do.
When you graduate, they graduate. Visit finishyourdiploma.org to find free and supportive adult education centers near you.
Did you know dragging chains can spark a wildfire?
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Welcome back. Just a few months ago, President Joe Biden caused a bit of controversy after announcing student debt relief of up to $20,000. Despite the long awaited arrival of student debt relief, the Biden administration faced several lawsuits aimed at blocking this relief. More recently, Biden's Justice Department urged the Supreme Court to intervene in the lawsuit that blocks student loan forgiveness. Economist at LendingTree and student loan expert Jacob Channel joined me for a discussion on what this meant for borrowers. Let's take a look. So, as I mentioned, the last time we spoke, student loan debt relief was up to $20,000. But that was a few months ago that we kind of heard this. Why is this process being slowed down?
Well, really, in I think the shortest words possible, it's because of a myriad of legal challenges. So a lot of people, many different organizations or states or individuals have come forward and sued the Biden administration, effectively saying they don't think that the forgiveness that he's proposed is legal. And as a result of a lot of back and forth within the courts, there have been a lot of delays in actually implementing the plan.
Now, as you mentioned, there has been a lot of lawsuits, and we know about 6 so far that has been, presented to the Biden administration. Why are they being sued? I think it's just so strange to think that the president would do something that anybody would consider to be illegal. So can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I think the thing to keep in mind is that, like economists, for example, economists like me, if you ask us, how's the economy doing? 5 different economists will probably give you different answers. In some instances, that's true of the law as well. Sometimes you can ask 5 different lawyers what their opinion is on an executive action or a law, and they might give you 5 different answers as to whether or not it's legal. So the Biden administration maintains that what it is doing is legal because of the HEROES Act, which was passed in 2003. However, there are a variety of people who argue that it is not legal. And so we've kind of got to wait for everything to move through the court system. It could eventually even go up to the Supreme Court, where they will finally decide once and for all whether or not this is legal. But regardless, right now, it really just boils down to a difference in opinions over whether or not this executive action is legal.
Now, on Monday, November 14th, a federal appeals court issued a nationwide injunction temporarily barring the Biden administration student loan debt relief program. What does this mean for those who have already applied for student loan debt or student loan debt relief?
Yeah, so unfortunately, it really, at least in the short term, it means that nothing is probably going to happen insofar as you getting like a relief check or something like that. Because of this injunction, as well as another lawsuit from the 11th from a Texas judge, right now everything is pretty much on hold. The Biden administration, like I said earlier, they maintain that what they're doing is legal, so they are going to appeal this. So in the future, it's perhaps possible that we will eventually see the relief. But even if you apply, right now they're not even taking new applications. So as of right now, everything has really just been sort of stopped in its tracks while everything works its way through the court system.
So I want to mention that close to 26 million Americans have already applied for student loan forgiveness. But due to the nationwide block that took place on November 14th, does this mean those who have already applied will have to start, payments in January?
As things currently stand, the answer is probably yes, at least insofar as the Biden administration has announced that January will be the end date of the student loan payment pause, which has been in effect since March 2020. Now, with that said, I think that there is a pretty good chance that they're going to push that date back, at least while everything kind of works its way through the courts. I can't guarantee for sure they're going to do that, so everyone should prepare to resume making their payments when January comes around, and that means right now budgeting for those payments. But it is something that could potentially end up being delayed even further, just because everything is such a mess right now.
Now, I quickly want to say, did you possibly see this coming? Because I remember the last time we spoke, you did say that, you would advise people to start preparing to make some sort of payment. So can you just talk about, why you said that the last time and your thoughts on that now?
Certainly. So there are 2 big reasons. First, even if you qualified and did receive up to $20,000 worth of student loan debt forgiveness, there are a lot of people for whom that's not going to completely wipe out their balance. So they'd still owe money on something that was left over. However, the other thing is that I think based on how many of the courts in this country are made, based on who's sitting on them as judges, there are a lot of conservative judges, and from the get-go, conservatives weren't particularly thrilled about this executive action. So I think as a result, it was always probably going to be a very legally contentious battle between the Biden administration, between conservative groups who want to stop this executive action from going through. Again, I can't predict the future. I really wish I could say for certain, here's what's going to happen. But at least in the meantime, because everything is so up in the air, I always say you should hope for the best while preparing for the worst. And this is a great example of that. And in this case, preparing for the worst means preparing for your payments to resume, which is why you should be budgeting and paying attention to what you owe right now, so you're not blindsided if and when payments do start happening again.
Now, prior to the 14th, a few of the lawsuits were rejected due to lack of legal standing. Why were some of the lawsuits being rejected? And could you just talk a little bit more about, the background in that?
Yeah, so again, this kind of goes back to how different judges, different lawyers might have different opinions on what is or isn't legal or what does or does not have standing. A lot of the earlier lawsuits, like you pointed out, were rejected because they didn't have legal standing. But because of how the appeals process works in this country, you can say, okay, this judge doesn't agree with me. I'm going to appeal to a higher court. Recently, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, when they issued their injunction, they also sort of hinted or said that they believe that there actually is standing in this case. So in that instance, they kind of overrule lower courts. Eventually, this could make its way up to the Supreme Court, and they will have the final say as to whether or not this does have standing or doesn't have standing. But again, like I said, this is one of those issues where there's just going to be different opinions, and that's sort of why we're not seeing a uniform response with regard to the question of standing.
So I want to talk about the difference of opinions in this country because many Americans have fought for, just student loan debt relief. But, why are there so many people against this?
So there are a variety of reasons. For example, some people may be upset that they don't qualify for student loan debt forgiveness. Some people may be upset that they've already paid off their loans and they feel it's unfair that other people won't have to do the same thing. From a more legal perspective, some states may be suing, arguing that a lack of student loan debt interest will harm their revenue streams. Certain corporations may also be suing, saying if we can't offer people help with their student loan debt or the ability to qualify for other types of relief through our organization or something like that, then it could also affect their ability to hire people. So there are a wide variety of complaints about this forgiveness. Whether or not you think those complaints are valid is certainly a different question and something that people are going to have very different opinions on. But again, it's ultimately going to come down to probably, potentially what the Supreme Court has to say, what they think is valid and what they don't think is valid. Because if it does make its way up to the Supreme Court, they'll ultimately be the final word on this, regardless of what they have to say.
I also want to bring up the different parties because Republicans and Democrats are at odds when it comes to this, with both parties having opposing views on how this will affect the economy. Can you go into further detail about this?
Yeah, so the more conservative angle would say that because inflation is already so bad, if you're giving people extra money, like by forgiving their student loans, it could actually make inflation worse because people have more money to spend. On the other end of the spectrum, more left-leaning people might say that this is actually going to help people because it'll boost their savings, which is needed, especially in a period of high inflation. And also, it can help people better save for something like a down payment on a home. Because after all, if you're not making a student loan debt payment, you've potentially got a few $100 extra a month that you can use for a variety of purposes. In terms of my personal view on this, I don't think that it's going to have, at least in the short term, a particularly profound effect on the economy. The reason for that is because payments have been paused since March 2020. Most people have not been making their student loan debt payments. So any extra money that they have has probably already been put in their bank accounts, has probably already been circulated in the economy. Once repayments resume, we might actually see a tiny little bit of a deflationary effect just because a lot of people are still going to make payments. And so there will be less money in the economy. In the longer term, I would probably err more on the side of this could potentially really help people, especially as it'll give them access to more cash they can use not only for basic necessities, but also to save up for things like I mentioned earlier, like a down payment or to pay off other higher interest debt. So I would say my opinion is this is probably more beneficial than not. But like I mentioned earlier, different economists might have slightly different viewpoints.
So I just want to clarify, you said that you think that it's not going to have like a huge effect. Is that necessarily like a good thing or a bad thing, or is it kind of in the middle?
I'd say it's probably kind of in the middle. So I should clarify again that it's probably not going to have a huge effect in the short term, just because the extra money that people won't be spending, they already haven't been spending because the payment has been on pause. So I think that if anything else, it's probably not going to contribute to higher inflation, which is a good thing. With that said, depending on how much longer the court battles last, there could be other challenges. For example, some people might have issues making payments once they resume. So that could be kind of more of a bad thing. And again, to reiterate, I think that in the longer term, if this really does go through, I think it would probably have a more positive effect than anything else, just because it'll give people access to more money that they can use for other important things, like I keep saying, like a mortgage or something like that.
Now, I know that a lot of stuff with this is changing so rapidly. Can you just let everybody know how they can actually stay up to date with this story and kind of know what's going on when it comes to student loan debt relief?
Yep, absolutely. So I think really the best way to do it is probably just to keep to keep checking in on studentaid.gov. That's the government website for student aid for the Department of Education. They often, they'll post announcements there. If you've applied for debt relief, keep an eye out on your email. They'll be sure that it is from, a .gov address. Don't fall victim to scammers because they are out there, especially right now. So, I would say just keep an eye out on things. And the other bit of advice is don't doom spiral. I know it can be really tempting when things aren't necessarily going your way, where everything is kind of in the air, to think, oh God, the world is ending. The reality is nobody knows for sure what's going to happen here. So right now, there's no sense in panicking about something that you can't control. Instead, like I mentioned earlier, just try to budget, try to figure out how you can make your payments. And if you think you're going to have trouble, do get in touch with studentaid.gov right now and figure out if you maybe qualify for other types of relief programs that are separate from this, or income-based repayment programs. Don't wait, because the longer you wait, the harder things are going to be if and when payments do resume.
We'd like to thank Jacob Channel for coming on the show back to back to keep our viewers updated about the status of the student loan forgiveness program. We have to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more Open right after this.
Jason, let's go see your room.
What do you think? We kept it a little spare, so you can decorate it how you like.
Dinner!
Go. Excellent. Suckers. Yeah, I saw you guys out there. We're in the room. We're in the room.
You're not gonna get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff.
Mama!
Like making sure your kids are in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right at nhtsa.gov/the-right-seat.
¿Qué color? Perfecto, mijo.
Gracias. Thank you.
What's wrong, mijo?
Donating to a pet's medical care is one of the many ways you can help families in your community. Pets and people belong together. Learn more at petsandpeopletogether.org.
Found my heart out there in the open. Trees make you feel small. Can't help but get lost again.
Feel the beat of nature at a park or forest near you. Find a forest and music inspired by nature at discovertheforest.org.
Welcome back. After the shocking overturning of Roe v. Wade, many Americans feared the Supreme Court could be on the path to undoing same sex marriage. In an effort to avoid this outcome, the Senate voted to open debates on a bill that will codify same sex marriage. Since the airing of the segment, NPR reports the Senate is set to move forward with the Respect for Marriage Act to codify same sex and interracial marriages through federal protections. To understand the importance of this effort, please take a look at this segment with the Director of Academic Enrichment at Destination Tomorrow, Dr. Gloria Pope. Now, can you just let everybody know a little bit more about your organization, Destination Tomorrow?
Well, Destination Tomorrow is based here in the Bronx. We have multiple offices. Our key office is on 149th Street. We are the LGBTQI plus enrichment center in a way, because we are actually a place where youth can come. We provide a number of services, including housing, as well as social services, mental health, HIV testing, and a number of other things for the community that we service. We also have a COVID disparities plan where we work with our other organizations to support other health awareness issues in the community. So for my department, educational enrichment, we do a number of things from job readiness to the NADP program, GED prep, and financial literacy. So DT does a lot.
All right, thank you so much for sharing that. Now, today we're going to be talking about same-sex marriage and the threats that could be, happening for many people in the LGBTQ plus community. So I want to just start off by saying that a right to same-sex marriage was established by Obergefell v. Hodges in 2015. Now, I think understanding history is just important in general to know where we're going in the future. So can you just talk a little bit more, just about the history behind that?
Well, for our community, same-sex marriage was always been a big thing because marriage comes with so many different rights in our country. That's the base of the families, the base of a lot of our systems when it comes down to medical insurance and a lot of other things. Even basic family planning is really affected by the concept of marriage. So in 2015, once it became legalized, it opened up an avenue for so many different families to solidify themselves with here in this country to get access to simple things as health insurance or access to simple things as being on the birth certificate of your child that you created together. So same-sex marriage has been a huge aspect for our community, and it's something that's definitely needed because we deserve to have that right.
Now, I'm so glad, and this is the reason why I love having these interviews, because prior to this, when I think of marriage, I just think, oh, it's about love. But there are, like you mentioned just now, there are so many benefits and there are just so many, important things that come with marriage. So thank you so much for sharing that and just expanding, to people who don't know the meaning, or the benefits that can come with marriage. Now, can you talk about the threat same-sex marriage is currently facing?
Well, ultimately, as a result of Roe versus Wade, we're seeing that years and years of advocacy and community work has been thrown away, ultimately, right? And people's rights and opportunities are just being subjected to the views of particular individuals versus their own personal needs. And as we go through history, we realize that once you have such a large scale change, it can be a real snowball effect where other things can be affected. So same-sex marriage is one of the first things that came up, as well as simple as IVF, as people creating families. And that definitely affects the queer community more than most. So, right now the risks are just taking away our right to have access. And access is going to be a key word I'm going to say a lot during this because, of course, marriage is about love, but marriage provides access to so many different things in a lot of different ways.
Now, I want to just add quickly, were you at all surprised to see that we're in this place now? Because I have seen people online say, after Roe v. Wade and seeing what happened with that a lot of things were going to happen next. Were you surprised at all to see that we're in this situation right now?
No, not at all. This country, unfortunately, is known for such a thing. We make certain decisions that cause transition. Right? Because everything can happen, because everything that we do has a result that's going to come after. There's consequences for all of our behaviors, whatever they may be. And these are kind of some of the consequences that we're going to face as a community, that certain individuals are going to feel more empowered to take away even more rights from individuals. Let's look at the fact that women didn't even have the right to vote forever, it seems like. We were definitely in the 20th century before we were even able to have a choice. People of color didn't have access to a lot of things until the civil rights movement until the 60s, but they were here for centuries. centuries. So this country has always been delayed when it came to basic human rights. So I'm not surprised that we're all, especially in my community, are really up in arms about what possible can happen for us as we move forward with the next few years.
Now, as I mentioned previously, that there are some efforts being taken to help codify same sex marriage. So far, several Republicans have supported efforts to pass legislation, again, that could potentially codify same sex marriage. And they currently need 10 more Republicans to support the bill. Can you first just tell me your thoughts on this?
Well, codifying, definitely for people who don't understand that word, is a very complex word for some of us. It just basically means making something into a law, making it solidified as federal law in this country. And it's a bill that we all need to have the support of, is because why, especially for, let's leave myself an example. I've been married to my wife now for 6.5 years. And with these types of rulings, what is that going to say? That tomorrow, all of a sudden, we're not married anymore? All of a sudden, my name who's on my daughter's birth certificate won't necessarily count anymore. There's so much at risk. So supporting this bill is important because the queer community is also rebuilding family foundations, and strong families, two-parent homes are essential to the growth of our nation overall. And we should not be so subject to what those families look like.
Now, I'm so glad that you mentioned that because I want to bring up something that I read in Vox. Now, this bill would repeal the 1996 Defense of Marriage Act, which previously defined marriage as a legal union between a man and a woman. And it would also force states to recognize same-sex marriage and even interracial marriages. So as you mentioned, like the idea of family and what that looks like is changing. Can you just talk about how, what we're seeing in society today, this is not just about the LGBT community alone. Although it is affecting that community, this is something that is, I would say, like just a humanity problem that we're seeing just in general. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, definitely. Everything is about everybody, because once you make one decision to change somebody's rights or what they can do, what they cannot do, it's going to affect others. Because who's to say that all of a sudden, oh, interracial marriages can't work? Oh no, marriages across cultures can't work. Marriages to anyone can't work. You can't marry somebody from a different country. So it can affect so many different people, because then you're sitting there, now we're all subject to personal opinion versus this basic human rights for everybody. So yes, it's clear, especially when it comes to things of interracial marriage, because this country is definitely racially driven. It always has been. So how can we sit here and not think that they may come for that next? Because remember, interracial marriage wasn't legal for a long time either. That took a long time to pass. So who knows if they might reject that as well. So everybody at this point in time should start advocating for keeping this, because it can just spiral to other things.
Now, I want to talk about, Roe v. Wade. Just again, if same-sex marriage saw a similar outcome to that, what could this mean for people in LGBT communities?
Fear, because there is no clear answer. We don't know what ultimately that will look like. The thing about Roe versus Wade, you still have states who are okay. I'm a proud New Yorker. I'm proud, taxes and all. I'm happy to live in the state that I live because it's so liberal, and I feel safe here with my basic human rights here in this state. But with certain shifts of this country, we don't know what can possibly happen. We don't know if all of a sudden it nullifies my wedding, it nullifies my legal binding marriage, right? It nullifies my children, it nullifies my family situation, it nullifies my situation for when I go, if I leave my partner here, as she may not have the legal access to my Social Security to take care of our family. So it's the longevity, the long game that really matters, because, we're legally married because we wanted to sit here and have a strong foundation and, create generational wealth. And this bond that we have that's legal currently in this country provides that access. But taking that away, it can leave my children and my grandchildren destitute.
Now, you talked a little bit about, being from New York and, feeling safe here. And I know that a lot of women, when Roe v. Wade happened, kind of felt similar. Do you think New Yorkers should get too comfortable just because, maybe we're protected? Or do you think New Yorkers should also, stand up and advocate and be aware about what's happening in in different states?
Well, first of all, New Yorkers need to stand up and stand proud. We're the loudest people alive, and we need to stand up and advocate for others. We're strong. We're definitely New York strong. I go with it 1000% that we are here and we can really show how we are able to build up our state and support people and still give them basic human rights, right? Even when it comes down to basic stuff about how much people are actually physically making to survive, like income based, right? Because there's still states who don't have a minimum wage where people still can't survive. $7, it doesn't matter. Your cost of living is clear where we are here too. So it's just like there's so many examples of the state and how we do things and that we succeed and that people can have a good way of living here. So yeah, I don't think that we should sit here in our little bubble. No, I'm not a bubble person. Let's stand on the rooftops and let's rap and sit here and advocate for other states to kind of join us and align with our brothers and our sisters who are at more risk in some of these states that they call their home.
Now, if this bill passes protecting the right to same-sex marriage, what message could that be sending to LGBT communities? I just want to add that I think it's good that people are thinking like, you know what, let's get ahead of this now. So, if LGBT communities, have the right to same-sex marriage and that's protected, what message could that be sending?
Well, ultimately, it's going to send the message that somebody cares about us. We fought really hard for many years, from Stonewall, for our rights, to be seen. Let's not even go back to the health crisis of the AIDS epidemic that happened back in the 80s. And that's because the 80s is not even that long ago. It's only 40 years ago that we were sitting here asking for medical treatment, right? For our gay and our queer people who were experiencing AIDS during that time. So it's like for us, I just feel as if it's really just important that we just have access to certain things, and this legislation being legal would give us this level of security that's so important, because who doesn't want to feel safe in a place that you live, a place that you thrive, a place that you support and that you honestly pay taxes to, because let's not even get into what the queer dollar looks like. We're $1 trillion group of people. There's a lot of money that comes directly from us. We buy homes, we open businesses. So why should we not get the same supports as everybody else?
Now, and also, can you just quickly explain how people, if they want to be more informed, where could they quickly go just to learn more about it?
Well, definitely you can come over to Destination Tomorrow on 149th Street. We are big on an advocacy piece and how you can actually support these different legislations. We're really lobbying for a lot of different things. Sean Coleman, our CEO, is great and really focused on how DT can be a centralized space across this country for individuals to find out information about the queer community and how you can support. There's also a number of websites that you can look at, and you can check out our website, destinationtomorrow.org, and you can find information there as well.
Thank you again to Dr. Gloria Pope and our friends at Destination Tomorrow for taking the time to join us on the show. We've now come to the end of our show today, and if you missed any part of today's show, you can catch the Cable cast at 5 and 10 p.m. on Optimum Channel 67 and Verizon Fios Channel 33, or watch anytime on the web at bronxnet.org. We want to take this time to thank all of our viewers for joining us, and we look forward to providing you with all the latest news in 2023. I'm Kibin Aline, wishing you all a happy and healthy new year. See you next time.